Hello? Hello, everyone. If we could settle down. Well, believe it or not, it's GreenTalk number 4. We have with us Max Dunn. He has been a GreenTalk speaker before and is familiar with San Jose State and 100W. So I'll just provide a short introduction here. One of his quotes from his LinkedIn site says that he's passionate about helping the world move off dirty fossil fuels to a clean and sustainable energy future. And he's been Director of Engineering at Ohm Connect since 2014. There he leads development teams working on Python, Flask, Celery, HTML, JavaScript, MySQL, Redshift, and AWS. So I am going to turn the podium over to him. He can tell us more about who he is and what he does. Let's give him a warm 100W welcome.
Thank you, Barbara. On January 6, 2014, the polar vortex descended over Texas, bringing with it record lows. Now, unfortunately, in Texas, about 2/3 of the homes are heated by electricity, so this also caused a surge in electrical demand. The extreme lows also brought several electric power generators offline due to freezing cooling pipes, transmitters, and receivers. The grid operators were scrambling at this time to put emergency procedures into place to handle this imbalance between the demand and supply on the electric grid. Luckily, at this time, the wind was blowing fiercely, and the wind farms were putting a lot of extra power on the grid, and in large part due to this, it was able to avoid rolling blackouts. Score 1 for renewable energy. Yet in 2015, China dumped 20% of its wind power because the grid could not handle it. And this is not just China, this happens all over the world, where especially wind energy is either produced at night at a time when it's not needed, or too far away from where it is needed. Critics use examples of like this as arguments for why we can't rely on sustainable energy. This is one of the dirty secrets of clean energy that I'll talk about today. And there's many other obstacles in the place of moving off of dirty fossil fuels to a clean and renewable energy future. As Barbara mentioned, my name is Max Dunn. I encourage you all to link with me on LinkedIn, and so we can continue this conversation later. I love energy. I've been very passionate about helping the world move off of dirty fossil fuels towards a clean energy future. And as we'll see, there's a lot of challenges to doing that. The way I do presentations is a little different. I hate bullet points. I won't use bullet points. And so what you'll see up here is just a few words and some pictures to kind of give some background for what I'm talking about and also remind me where I am so I know where to go on this. But if you go to ohm.co/energy, it'll take you to a Google Drive document that is a paper that discusses almost all the topics we're talking about today and has all the references. So that might be very useful for you to refer back to get those references and find out more we're talking about. And again, if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to contact me. I love talking about this. So let's get into it. Some of the dirty secrets. Now, to understand why renewable energy is so difficult to integrate on the grid, we first have to understand something about the grid and the balancing of the grid. And this is a really hard concept to understand. And so I like to use the analogy of a bicycle. So did anyone ride their bike here to school today? Do they ride on a regular basis? See a hand right here. Do you ride on a regular basis to school? Are you a fast rider, slow rider, or kind of middle? Okay, all right. So middle is probably like 12 miles an hour or something. Fast is usually 15, and middle is 10. So maybe 12 miles an hour. Does that sound about right? Great. Do you want to come up here for a sec? I have a present for you. Oh, yeah? Yeah. And what was your name? So we're going to be giving away some Ohm Connect swag today to people that help out, answer questions and stuff. And so the first one we had is a messenger bag. So we want you to be the Ohm Connect messenger, and you're going to be our bike rider, and you're going to be our electric grid today. And you're going to have to ride at exactly 12 miles an hour all the time. What was your name again?
Julia.
Julia. Okay, thank you very much, Julia. Let's give her a round. Thank you. All right, so here's a representation of Julia. I think it did a pretty good job, not great, but this is her riding her bike to school. She's riding 12 miles an hour. No, it's level. Pretty easy to go. She doesn't have to pedal too hard. She's just pedaling along. But if she's the electric grid, she has to stay at 12 miles an hour. She can't go down to 11. She can't go above that. She's got to stay at 12. So right here, it's pretty easy. Maybe there's a wind or something. She has to pedal a little bit harder. Not too bad. But let's say Julia starts riding uphill. She's got to pedal a lot harder to keep going 12 miles an hour. And remember, she can't slow down. That's bad. She's got to go 12 miles an hour. Now let's say she goes downhill. Woo, this is easier, right? You know, she doesn't have to pedal, just kind of coast along. But she can't go more than 12. If she goes 13 or 14, that's bad for the grid too, so she might have to put on her brakes. So this is a way to think about the electric grid. And another thing to keep in mind is that there's no storage on an electric wire. When we produce electricity, the instant that electron is produced, it has to be used. It goes on one side of that wire and comes immediately out the other. It's not like a hose. You know, sometimes you'll be hosing something and you'll turn off the hose and go back, turn off the spigot. Well, there's still some pressure in there. It can still come out for a little while longer because there's a little storage in that hose. But electricity isn't like that. With electricity, if you turned off that spigot, it's immediately going to stop. There's no storage at all on that wire. So what that means is that in order to keep it balanced, in order for Julia to keep going 12 miles an hour, she's constantly got to adjust and pedal a little bit harder or a little bit less. So, for instance, if I walk over here and turn off the light, there's a power plant nearby that just reduced the amount that it put out a little bit to balance the grid. Now, if I turn back on the lights, the power plant just revved up a little bit to produce more. And this ripples throughout the grid. There's this constant balancing. You wouldn't think that like just turning off lights or something would make a difference, but it does. There's this constant balancing. Julia's always pedaling a little bit faster, a little bit harder, a little bit less hard to keep going 12 miles an hour. So this is kind of the key point of understanding why renewable energy is hard to integrate onto the grid. Supply has to instantly match demand, always, all right? Now, why is that such a big thing? And before we start, I want to talk about some terms. I've been using these things forever, so they make a lot of sense to me, but I realize some people might not be as familiar with them. So let's talk about fossil fuel power plant. What does that mean? What are some of the types of fossil fuel power plants? Does anyone want to hazard a coal? Natural gas? Yeah? What's that? Oil. Yes, oil's one. Anything else? Those are kind of the main ones. In California, we actually have a very clean supply. And we use a lot of natural gas, almost no coal. There's a little bit that's imported, about 1%, and a lot of renewable energy. What about nuclear? Is nuclear fossil fuel? No. Nuclear is still a big part of many electric grids around the world. France, still about 80% of their power comes exclusively from nuclear. They're reducing down like a lot of countries after some of the disasters that happened in Japan with the nuclear power plants. But fossil fuel power plants kind of work all the same way. They're heat-based. You got to burn something. It heats some water, produces steam, and it goes through a turbine. And that's the way they all work on that basic principle. So when I talk about fossil fuel power plants, that's what I'm talking about right there. And the main type, coal, natural gas, and oil. Oil, interesting, is not used a lot directly in the United States. Saudi Arabia actually produce almost all their electricity with oil because they have so much of it. But in the United States, not so much. All right. So when I was going over the slide deck this morning, I realized, well, we never really talked about renewable energy and define that. And I realize most of you probably know that already. but I did want to go over that just so that we're all on the same page there. So what are some of the types of renewable energy that's out there? Wind, sure, wind. Solar, good one. Does anyone know the two types of solar? Thermal and, does anyone know the term? Photovoltaic, right. Thermal is just heat. It's kind of like a fossil fuel, use the same principle. Photovoltaic transfers the photons into electrons directly. All right, so we have wind and solar. Anything else? Hydro? Yes? What? Explain that. So kinetic.
So you go on a bicycle and you just like ride there for like 20 hours.
Go on a bicycle and ride for 20 hours, right? You have a generator or something on a bike, yeah. So it's actually interesting you said that because kinetic energy is actually a byproduct of some other energy input. By itself, it's not. So if you were on a bicycle, the energy source would be food. And you're burning up food to produce that energy. So the kinetic energy is a way of transferring that fuel source into electricity. Anything else anyone can think of? Geothermal, another good one. Does anyone know how much geothermal we have in California? Or where it comes from? We'll see a little bit later the geothermal energy, but there's actually a place up north of San Francisco called the Geysers, which is a geothermal energy source, and it's clean, just steam comes out, it's really cool. There's not many places in the world where that works, because you need to have hot, dry rocks near the surface to be able to work on that. All right. So those are some of the same. We didn't talk about biomass. Has anyone ever had experience with biomass, burning something that grows? Is that CO2 neutral? Does that create global warming when you use biomass as an energy source? Because you're burning something, right? So it releases CO2. Anyone know the answer to that? So one thing I'm going to do to make it interesting for people to participate is I have some swag up here. I have T-shirts and tote bags and sunglasses. And so to encourage questions, my lovely assistant is going to be passing out these things. So if anyone wants to answer about biomass on whether it is CO2 neutral or not, you'll get your choice of one of these. Did I see a hand? Yes?
I'm going to say it's CO2 neutral because that carbon dioxide would already go back to the atmosphere when it's broken down by organisms or bacteria, the decaying plant matter.
Yes, close. You want to? So when you grow a plant, it takes out CO2 of the air, and when you burn it, it releases it. So it's essentially carbon neutral, but you have other problems with it. So my lovely assistant's going to come over, and you get your pick of what you would like. All right. So let's start talking about why renewable energy is hard to integrate. And the first thing is fluctuations. So I've had people tell me, solar power is very predictable. We know every day when the sun's going to come up. We know when it's going to set. We know how much energy it's going to produce. So it's a perfectly predictable energy source. Well, kinda, right? What about clouds in bad weather? This is an actual output of a solar farm that had clouds passing over it all day long. You can see these big drops going up and down. And remember, the grid's got to be balanced. So every time the solar drops, something has to go up an increasing amount to keep that grid stable. Julia's like pedaling faster and slower, harder and softer all the time to keep going that same speed. Now, wind, too, of course, is variable. There's lulls and gusts. Wind blows in California mainly at night. Other places blows different times. But it's definitely not a constant resource. And this causes problems, again, for the grid. So the takeaway of this is the first problem we're going to talk about is sun and wind fluctuates. It's not reliable. Now, why is this a problem? Why can't just natural gas and other power plants compensate for that and go up and down? It has to do with this concept called ramp rates. And basically what this means, how long does it take to go from a cold power plant that's producing no energy to full steam and producing a lot? And the answer is it takes a while. So to give you an example, here's some different types of power sources and how long it takes to go up. Now, nuclear, for instance, you never want to shut those babies off. They want to just run constantly all the time. Now, there is fail-safe. If a transmission line goes down or something, they can shut off very quick. But if that happens, it takes days to bring those back up. It's a very long process. Even a coal-fired power plant, you've got a lot of mass in there. And a lot of things have to heat up and get to the right temperature. You can't just like turn it on all at once. Because if one part of the plant gets really hot and the other part is cold, you'll have thermal expansion problems. Things can crack. As steam travels through, it's going to cause knocking and other problems. So it's got to come up gradually so that everything can get to equilibrium. Some coal power plants, smaller ones, can get up in hours rather than days. Natural gas, the combined cycle gas turbines that are much more efficient can take hours to come up because, again, it's a thermal equilibrium problem. The single-stage ones that are less efficient can come up in minutes. Still takes a while. And I just want to throw in hydro and solar to point out that hydro you can turn around in minutes. It's very quick. And solar's kind of instantaneous. But it's important to remember that the different types take a while. Now, I was once giving this talk, and someone said, well, actually, how do you turn on a natural gas power plant? What's the process? So I was joking around, so I reached my pocket and brought out my clicker, and I said, oh, you just walk in and click this, and it starts. Of course, I was joking about that. It's actually a very complicated process. And this is actually a training software that they use to train gas turbine operators how to bring up. And so you have all these things that you have to do in order to bring it from a cold start to full power. It's a very complicated process. So there will be a test on this later, so I hope you guys have studied this all. So the takeaway from this is the traditional generators have a hard time compensating for the fluctuations in renewable energy. Another problem is time of day. In most hot climates like California, our peak load is during the hot days during the summer, because we all have our air conditionings on. We use about twice as much electricity during the day in California as during the night. And so this coincides pretty well with solar. The sun shines during the day, so we can get power from solar. There's one problem, though, is that the peak power comes usually about 7 or 8 o'clock at night after the sun has gone down. This is when people are going home, they're cooking dinner, they're turning on TV, they're catching up on all their missed Game of Thrones. And then we have this peak, and the sun has gone away. So the sad fact about this graph is that if we relied only on solar energy, we would not be able to turn off any power plant, any dirty fossil fuel power plant, because they all have to come on when the sun goes down. So there's not this perfect match between solar and when we need it. Wind, too. As we discussed, in California, wind blows mainly at night. Well, we don't need extra power at night. We need less power at night. And that's why a lot of places, they dump it. There's just nothing they can do with it. Yes?
Sorry, on the last graph, it says solar energy stopped being produced around 3 o'clock. Isn't the sun on average down closer to 6 or 7? Why does it drop off so early? That's
a really good point. We will show a graph later on that shows actually yesterday in California, and we'll look at that exact thing. This was probably done in a northern latitude where the days are pretty short during a winter day when the sun kind of goes down at 3, which happens sometimes. Yes?
That says this was taken in the spring, though.
You're right.
Wouldn't your angle of inclination change at like in those later times, so you're not going to have your solar dependence function of your inclinations on the sun?
Yeah. So this is good. You guys are looking at the details, and that's a very important point. We'll see later that even in California, our peak's at 8, and even in the summer months, we don't have sun at 8 o'clock at night. So there's always this gap between the peak usage and the peak solar output. But I'm glad you guys caught that. I think someone deserves a T-shirt. All right. So the takeaway from this is the sun and wind are not perfectly aligned with the demand. Another problem is distance. In the US, most of the population is on the coast, the east and west coast here. And you can see we have pretty good power line transmission. These are all the major power line transmissions in the United States that carry power from one part to another. Now we have this big transmission line here that is actually carrying hydropower from Washington and British Columbia down into California, so we can distribute that out. We have a little bit going out here, and you can see some other ones. So that's pretty good. The problem is, if you look at our best solar resources, they're in the Southwest. And we don't have power lines going there. If you look at our best wind, we've got a lot of offshore, which we haven't started developing yet. So most of our developed is in the Midwest area here. And again, we don't have power lines to bring it out. So it's great, we've got power there, but we don't have a lot of people, don't have a lot of demand for it there. So unfortunately, that's not helping much. So the lesson here is that sometimes the renewable energy is not where you need it. Now, besides the kind of big distances, small distances actually make a big difference too. And this is called congestion. So this graph right here is actually the electric grid around San Jose State. This is every electric line, ones you see overhead and are buried. The red are the higher voltage, higher capacity ones, and then going down to the low ones. So this is really, as you can see, a hodgepodge. It's not easy to tell like where one starts and where one ends. And the electricity has to flow from one end to the other to get to where it's needed. Now, in the last 2 years, we've had some pretty big winter storms. Did anyone lose power for an extended period of time in the last couple of years? See a hand back here? How long did you lose power for? About a day? Yeah, where were you located? In South San Jose? Okay, I think someone gets a t-shirt over here without power a day. He needs to get warm for that. We had an instance where our power was down for almost 3 days. And there was a big storms, and there was a lot of houses out in the Santa Cruz Mountains without power. And so naturally, PG&E went there first to fix it, which is what they should do. But we had this little pocket where our power was down. And the frustrating thing was right across the street, they had plenty of power. Their power was on, but our power was off. And it was all due to this hodgepodge of a grid that there was a little section somewhere that was down, and we weren't able to get power, and everywhere else was able to. So this will be more important in the next few slides, but the takeaway here is that where power is located on a small level is very important. Now we come to my favorite part of this. I love this graph. Every time I see this, I just think it's so cool. But there's some background I need to give you to understand this. This is the electric prices in California. And each of these dots is called a locational marginal price, or LMP. And the whole idea behind this is that with these ideas of congestion and moving electricity around, electricity put on the grid where it's needed, it's much more valuable than electricity put on the grid where it's not needed. All right? It's helping Julie out. It's like, you know, when she's going uphill, giving her a little push versus holding her back. We want to get the power on the grid where it's needed. And the way they do this is through prices. Now, to understand prices, a typical price for wholesale electricity is between $40 and $60 per megawatt hour. Now, this is kind of confusing because like when we get billed in kilowatt hours. And like a typical price that we pay might be 20 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's weird to think about megawatt hours, but you just kind of move the decimal place over. So a $50 megawatt hour would be 5 cents a kilowatt hour. And that kind of makes sense. The utilities are paying 5 cents for the electricity and charging us 20, and that's how they make their money. But they all price it in megawatt hours. So that's what we'll talk about here. So a typical price, if you see the green dots here, is like $50 a megawatt hour. That's the grid running just fine. Now, the red dots and the orange dots are where the prices have gone up. The locational marginal price of this node is $230. It's a lot more than the typical 50. So what the grid operators are saying is that we need power in this location. You know, we're all fine in the northern part of the state, the green dots, but we need power here, and we're going to pay more for it. And $230 is not unusual. We've seen prices go up to $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 for a small period of time when they're really having a problem. So these prices change all the time. But this is what I think is just so amazing and so cool about this, and it explains a lot of things we're talking about. See the blue dots? That's negative $68. Isn't that weird? A negative price for electricity? What does that mean? It means the more you use, the more you get paid. So go ahead and run your heater and turn on the stove and charge your electric car and stuff. You're going to get paid for the more you use. It also means if you're a solar farm and you're putting power on the grid, you have to pay to do that. Such a weird concept. Anyone know why they would do that? I think there's another T-shirt worthy question here. It's not an easy answer. Do you see any hands? Any takers? Is that a stretch? Oh, yes. They have excess power. I think she gets some swag here. Yeah, exactly. So this is like Julia when she goes downhill. They have extra power. How the utility operators put on the brakes is they charge negative prices. And the cool thing about this is right over here in the coast by San Francisco are positive prices, high prices. Out here, they're negative prices. And the reason I think this happened was that out in the Central Valley out here, those are all our utility scale solar farms. We have a lot of solar power out there. And we'll see just how much in a few slides. And there's not that many transmission lines over this mountain grade bringing that power out to the coast where it's needed. I think a power line went down. It could have been overloaded. It could have been hit by a car or something. And so all of a sudden, you've got all this extra power in the valley that you don't need, and you need more on the coast, and you have this imbalance. So the grid operators changes these prices, and people will be firing up these inefficient power plants or diesel generators or anything to keep that grid balanced, keep that bicycle moving exactly 12 miles an hour. And out in the valley, they might turn off stuff because they don't want to have to pay to put it on the grid. So this is an example of how the grid is balanced and how finely tuned it is, and how where the location you put it on is as important as how much you're putting on the grid. So takeaway from this is congestion can prevent balancing the grid. All right. Now, another of my favorite concepts is this thing called the duck curve. And again, this takes some explanation. So the first off, there's an organization called the California ISO, California Independent System Operator, usually abbreviated CAISO, and I used to say Cal ISO, so we'll just call it. So the Cal ISO is the entity that's responsible for keeping the grid balanced at all times. There's the one setting those prices on that. And they produce these charts of how much energy we use every day. You can actually go on Cal ISO, today's Outlook, and see this. And I just pulled this morning for yesterday. So let's look at the times and see if it looks right. This is yesterday. So we start seeing a little bit at 6:30, and by 7, we're starting to get some real power, which seems about right. Yesterday, when I walked to the train at 6:30, it was starting to get light. And then down here at 5, it's starting to come down, and by 6, there's almost none. Does that sound about right? Sun went down about 6? Okay. So that seems pretty reasonable for yesterday, so we passed the scrutiny test. Another interesting thing about this is see the top? See how it doesn't go nicely like that? Does anyone know why that would be? Clouds could be one. There's another interesting effect with solar PV that it doesn't work as well when it gets hot. So some of our highest production days will be on days like this where it's a cold, sunny winter day. But the other thing this could be besides clouds is those panels just start getting hot and not producing as much. And so this is typical. You kind of see this lopped off here. But another thing I want you to notice is on this side. This is megawatts, and we're just going to look at the last digit and call it gigawatts. So we've got 10 gigawatts yesterday of solar energy. Does anyone know how much a big coal-fired power plant or a nuclear power plant produces? Any guesses? There's another tricky one. I don't know if anyone know that. So let me give you 3 choices. 100 megawatts, a gigawatt, or 10 gigawatts. Let's pick on someone. What do you think? 100? Okay, what do you think? 10? It's actually a gigawatt. So a gigawatt's a lot of electricity, and a big friggin' coal-fired power plant or nuclear power plant will produce that, all right? Smaller gas turbines will produce 50 megawatts, maybe 100. You might need 10 of those or 20 of those to equal one big nuclear power plant, all right? So what this is saying is that yesterday in California at the peak, we were producing as much solar energy as 10 nuclear power plants. Now, I gave this talk about first time for about 3 years ago, 2 years ago. And I brought the graph in. It was just about 5,000. Just like 2, 3 years ago. It was half of that. Solar's been going in so fast in California. It's just amazing. Now, down on these lines, we have other things. We have wind. This is the geothermal that we're talking about. It's very baseline. We have some biogas and small hydro and some other things there. But we can see the main renewable energy source in California yesterday was solar PV. All right. Now, how does that work into the duck curve? All right. So on this chart, it's from the same site, this line up here is how much we used, how much electricity the whole state used. And the curve, it goes down at night. It peaks. It has this peak in the morning, people getting up, making breakfast, getting out the door. It goes down, and it has another peak in the evening, and you can see that is about 7 or 8 there. Now, in the summer, this is much more pronounced. It goes down further during the day and much higher at night, especially as air conditioning and stuff kick on. But this line here is the total electricity minus the renewables. It's called net demand. And another way of thinking about this is what our old, dirty, stinky fossil fuel power plants need to produce. During the middle of the day, when the sun is shining, they don't need to produce as much. And then as the sun goes down, they got to ramp back up and go here. So this looks like it's really cool, right? It's really cool to see, like, oh my gosh, look at all of that energy. As a matter of fact, if you look at the bottom here, there's about 11 gigawatts, and the top here is about 28. What that's saying is the peak yesterday, about 40% of our power came from solar PV in California. So in California, we have mandates by 2020 and 2030. We have certain goals, and they keep changing. But does anyone know what the current goals are for California for amount of renewable energy on the grid? There's a T-shirt in it, or a pair of sunglasses. All right. 50% by when? There's one that's 2020 and 2030. It's actually 2030, but I think he still deserves it because he spoke up when no one did. So California by 2020, the goal was 1/3 of our power should come from renewable energy sources. Now, in March of last year, there was a day where 50% of our power came from renewable energy sources. And that's like just not the peak. That's the whole day. All of the energy of that day came from it. So we're getting really close to this 33%. So we were going to go out to 2050 or something, but now we're shooting for, by 2030, to have 50% of our power come from renewable energy. And a lot of it will be solar and wind. So that's great, right? All these fossil fuel power plants turn off during the day, and then at night they turn back on. Yeah, that is good, except for this problem right here, and it's called the ramp rate. And California ISO just started doing this where they're showing the ramp rate because this is what keeps them up at night. This is what scares them more than anything else. They had to ramp 13 gigawatts, like 13 nuclear power plants, in 3 hours. Now remember we talked about like a nuclear power plant takes days to put on and coal can take at least hours or days. Well, they had to do 13 of those in 3 hours. And this is the wintertime. It's not even that bad. In the summertime, it's going to get worse. And so the duck curve really illustrates this problem. And you can't see it as much on this, but the duck is kind of like, if you see, this is the belly of the duck, and this is the head. There'll be other graphs that look a little bit more, but that's kind of what that is about. So this ramp rate is kind of one of the key takeaways from this, is the traditional generators just can't ramp up quickly enough to be able to accommodate lots of renewable energy, especially when you have gusts and when you have clouds and other things that are causing a lot of variation in it. Now, when we take the problem to an extreme, we have a problem with what's called backfeed. And this example comes from Hawaii, but to understand it, we need to give you a little bit of a physics lesson on how electricity works. The easiest way of thinking of electricity is it flows downhill. Julia's on the top of the hill, and she just wants to coast down the hill. That's much easier than riding uphill. So when it's produced at a generator, it's a higher voltage, and then it goes to a transmission line, it goes a little bit lower voltage, and then it goes to a substation, it's a lower voltage, and then it goes to neighborhood transport, lower, and then it goes to your house, and it's even a little lower voltage. So all these voltages just comes down. Now, there's no way of routing electrons. Like the utility company can't say, like, oh, I want 50 megawatts going on this wire and 30 megawatts going on this wire. It just doesn't work that way. It's going to go where it wants to go. It's going to flow downhill. All right? So if you have solar on your house, most of the time it's going to be producing more than you're using during the day when the sun is out. Where does it go? Remember, there's no storage. You can't store it in a wire. It's got to go someplace. So where it goes is back onto the grid. It'll go to your neighbor's house, help them a little bit, and other people around you, and that's good. But the way it does that is to raise the voltage of that little bit to get that to go back onto the grid. All right? That's a good thing, but let's think about if your whole neighborhood now has solar, and then it becomes a fight. You raise your voltage a little bit to put your power back on. Your next door neighbor goes, hey, I need to put my power back on the grid. It raises a little bit. A third guy says, but I want my power on the grid. He has to raise a little bit. And it can get to the point where there's too much voltage on the grid, and it can burn out motors and cause electrical fires. So what happens is it just shuts off. Circuit breakers go and it shuts off. So this is a problem with putting it too much power on the grid at a local level. It can cause problems. But in Hawaii, they have an even more severe problem. And one of the reasons is that Hawaii is a very unique place as far as electricity goes. Almost all of their electricity is produced by oil and natural gas that they have to ship in. It's also very geographically centered so that they have to use online. They don't even have transmission lines between islands. So if one island's producing more, they can ship it to another. They have to use it on that island. And because the electricity prices are so high, they're the highest in the nation, they run 30 to 40 cents, and they've got lots of sun. A lot of people have solar. It makes sense. You can save money like from day one in Hawaii, putting solar PV on your roof. But of course, now we have this backfeed problem with neighbors fighting each other. It got so bad in Hawaii on this one day that it went negative. Remember, in California it was coming down, it went to 11 gigawatts or something. At this place, at this substation, it actually went negative. This is Julia on a super steep hill. She's screaming at the top of her lungs, and she's putting on the brakes as much as she can, and she still is picking up speed. She's still going faster, and you know she's going to crash when she gets to the bottom. And that is what's going to happen in this case here. There's such a big problem in Hawaii that they've actually put a moratorium on new solar until they figure it out. And they changed the net metering. You no longer get credit for power you export to the grid. So this is a big problem. And you can see that this has that curve-shaped body. And in Hawaii, they actually call it the Nessie curve, after the Loch Ness monster. Because for them, it's not a duck. It's not a cute little thing waddling around. It's a monster that's going to devour them. So they call it the Nessie curve. So takeaway from this is this backward flow can cause problems, too much renewable energy. All right. So, we've talked about renewable energy and some of the problems. There's intermittency. It's far from where we need it. There's congestion problems. There's backflow problems. So I don't think there's any hope for a clean energy future. So I guess I'll just stop my talk. Thanks, everyone. It was great. Oh, wait. I think there might be some solutions. Let's look and see if there's some solutions to these problems. All right, the first is economics, all right? There's a lot of people in Washington now that don't believe in renewable energy and are trying to take the funding away. It's a little sad, but you know what? Let them, because the economics are starting to drive it. I did a calculation a few years ago that suggested that once solar PV panels came down to about $2 a watt, they're starting to be very competitive with other forms of energy. It's now down to less than 50 cents a watt. There's many places, Hawaii is one, where solar PV without subsidies is the cheapest form of energy. In India last year, there was a tender for a big solar farm that was at 47 cents a megawatt, $47 a megawatt hour. And if you remember from the green dots, $40 to $60, it's right in that range. They're economical. In most places, they're not building any new coal-fired power plants. In the U.S., there's no new coal-fired power plants planned. Also, they're tearing some down. A lot of it's economics. They're just not as economical as clean energy. So I love seeing this because it really gives me heart with sometimes the political situation might not be conducive to it. Doesn't matter. It's rolling ahead anyways. Now, another way of looking at this is that renewable energy uses free energy, free sources of energy, where any of the other fossil fuel, you have to pay for it. So whether it's natural gas or coal or even nuclear, there's a cost of energy to produce that megawatt hour. And you can't go below that. So let's say with a coal-fired power plant, the coal contributes, say, $20 to the cost of that energy. And if they sell for $30, they can use that to amortize the plant. It's very expensive to build a fossil fuel power plant. It can take a long time. So that's the bottom that they can go. The great thing with renewable energy, there's no bottom. If we get those solar PV costs down to almost nothing, we get free energy. So this is kind of a graph that shows that coal has all this overhead cost and this fuel cost and everything, and wind and solar can still beat it on an economic basis. So that, to me, is one of the most heartening things about our renewable energy. We talked about transmission lines, that we've got solar in the southwest and wind in the midwest, and we don't have transmission lines to get there. But we're starting to build them. And we're also building DC power lines, a direct current. Now, that's in opposition to the way we carry most electricity now with alternating current, or AC lines. And AC lines are good because it's easy to step up the voltage and down. It's kind of a 100-year-old technology. The problem is that you get a lot of transmission losses. The alternating current part of this radiates energy away. So in the United States, we lose about 7% of all of our electricity just on our transmission lines. With DC transmission line, it's much less, and you can use smaller wires. So there's this whole series of transmission lines planned throughout the United States. Now imagine this, we're on the West Coast, and we're going to do a dawn patrol surfing. And the sun's hardly up, we get up, we're going to make some avocado toast, so we put it in the toaster. Well, if we had lines from the East Coast, the sunshine on the East Coast could be powering that toaster so I could get my avocado toast before I go surfing in the morning. Wouldn't need any fossil fuel here. Now let's extend that out the other way to Hawaii. Let's say we have Hawaii lines there. Well, I come home and I'm tired and I want to turn on the TV and watch something. Well, the electricity from Hawaii can come and power that. And let's take that a step further. Let's wrap those lines all the way around the world. And then in the middle of the night, we can be getting power from Saudi Arabia. Think about that. And then in the daytime, they can get power from us. We could power the entire world with only solar energy if we had enough transmission lines transmitting it around the globe. They're not cheap. It's not economical now, but it is one of the things that is coming. So moving power to where it's needed is very important. Talked about ramping. And the gas turbine manufacturers and the fossil fuel people are aware of this problem. And so they're actually starting to bring out newer models that ramp up more quickly to help make up for the intermittent nature of renewable energy. And so this is something that is going on. And it'd be nice to eventually move to a world where there's no fossil fuels needed. In the near term, we're going to need, especially the gas-fired turbines, to make up for this. So they're going to be around for a while. Luckily, natural gas is fairly clean. So gas generators can help pick up the slack. Smart inverters. So an inverter is this electronic component that turns the DC current that's produced from a solar panel into the AC current that's needed by your house to run, or the electric grid. So they all have this. Currently, the inverters have very stringent safety requirements. So for instance, when they connect to the grid, they just wait and listen for 5 minutes to make sure everything is okay before they start putting power on the grid. And there's a good reason for this. It has to do with people working on the lines. A line worker could go and shut down a line on both sides and be working in the middle. Well, if you've got solar power that's putting on that grid and it's live, you could hurt them and kill them. So that's why your solar power doesn't work when your electricity goes off, which is crazy, right? It's like, hey, we have power outages. I have solar panels. Why can't I power my house? Well, it's designed not to do that because we don't want to put power back on the grid when the grid is off. Also, if it detects any anomaly in the grid, like let's say the voltage goes up a little bit or down a little bit, it'll also just shut off immediately. So they're very conservative. There's new standards going on now to improve upon that so that these inverters can actually help support the grid in that way. So let's say, for instance, the grid starts getting stressed and the voltage is going down. Julie's really tired. She's just not able to keep up, you know. So it's going down a little bit. Well, the old inverters would just shut off completely. And that just makes the problem worse. You now have less power on the grid. But in the newer standards, they'll actually stay on to help support that grid. And in other cases where they see an anomaly or there's too high voltage, instead of just shutting off like that, they'll kind of ramp down more gradually. This gives the other generators time to make up for that and balance the grid. They can also take signals from your utility to turn up a little bit or off a little bit so that they can help balance the grid. So there's a lot of work being done on these inverters to really make them help balance the grid more than they are right now. Now we get into this other thing which starts to touch on what my company does. So it's called demand response. For a long time, this was always very confusing to me until I finally realized that what this is just talking about is supply and demand of electricity. Demand is what we're using. And by demand response means making it responsive. So instead of just like charging your EV whenever you want or cooking dinner wherever you want, if we can vary that a little bit, we can also help support the grid. So these programs have been around for a long time for big businesses, commercial and industrial. But the way they work is they'll say like, hey, we'll pay you money if, say, up to 10 times a year, you'll turn down your power for like 4 hours. And those are during the peak hot summer days. And businesses say, sure, I'll do that. But of course, they hope you don't ever ask them to do that. I mean, it'd be kind of a bummer if all of a sudden, like, we had to turn off all the lights in here because we had a demand response event. But it's something that works, that the utilities have used and been going on a long time. But there are some problems with that. One, it's only on these hot summer days. It doesn't help balance these other intermittencies with the grid. They're private contracts negotiated between entities and the utilities. And they don't like to do it. They want to get the money for it. They don't want to actually have to turn it off. So Ohm Connect is involved with residential demand response. And residential, that just means houses. That just means people. And so what we do is we go and sign up people and say, hey, sign up for us. We'll get your smart meter data. 2 or 3 times a week, we'll send you a signal, say, hey, it's an ohm hour. We need you to reduce. But it's only for 1 hour. So like when we get one, we'll say like, oh, okay, instead of having dinner at 5, we'll wait to 6. We'll go for a walk. Other people have their kids do it. One of my friends at work, his kids go around, they're turning off all the lights, they're telling Dad, get off the computer, Dad, you know, we're doing an ohm hour. And then they'll get like those headlamps and like read by flashlight, you know, in order to conserve all their electricity. We also had one woman call us up and say, hey, I'd like more ohm hours. Oh, okay, why do you want more? She says, well, you know, my boyfriend plays video games like all the time. The only time I can get him off of the computer to talk to me is when you have an ohm hour. And then we have a nice candlelight dinner and we go for a walk. So we have people that want more ohm hours. So part of what we do is we want to make it fun. Some of the other things we do is you can have streaks so that if you reduce consistently, your payment keeps going up and up. And this was a feature that kind of caught us by surprise. We kind of threw it in there. Just kind of, oh, this seems like a good idea. And people love it. And I'm on a streak of 27 now, I think. We have someone's like on streaks of 50. And I'll tell you, when you're on a streak of 50, you really want to make sure that you reduce each time because you want to keep on that streak. And people can make $5 an event for turning off your electricity once. That's kind of the high end, but it can be really significant. So it's fun. You know, you get points when you reduce. You can get cash for that, or you can get smart devices. You also can get tokens to do spins to win stuff. We're batting around this idea of like, instead of paying people like, $1 to save an event, we'll put you in a lottery where you could win $10,000. So we're always doing stuff that's fun like that. But the other advantage of this too is that it's very location specific. So we saw in that LMP how electricity at the right place is as important as how much you're putting on. Well, we can target exactly where the electricity is needed. So Ohm Connect, we do real-time balancing, it's location specific, and it's fun. Now, people often ask, well, how do you guys make money? It's great, you're giving us money for this, but how are you making money? It's a really good question, not a super easy answer. One of the ways we make money is through this California program called DRAM, Demand Response Auction Mechanism. And one of the purposes of this is to bring the demand response away from private contracts that are negotiated in secret between companies and the utilities into an open market where it'll help drive down the cost. That's the auction mechanism part of it. Another goal of this is that it's the largest experiment to price negawatts. Nega, N with an N. Has anyone ever heard of this term, a negawatt, before? Yeah. Well, negawatt is just reducing. So let's say I'm a utility, and it's a hot summer day, and I need 10 more megawatts of power. Well, I can either pay someone to produce that, and let's say it's expensive. Let's say I'm paying them $500 a megawatt to put that on the grid. But what if someone was able to reduce that 5 megawatts? Well, isn't that the same? It balances the grid. We don't care if we put more or take out. The net effect is the same. But in the past, the electric markets haven't worked that way. They haven't priced reductions as much as they have priced putting more power on the grid. So that's where the term negawatts come from. So megawatt with an M is kind of like the positive, and nega is the negative. So this is a way of pricing reductions. So it's a really exciting experiment. It's going really well. It's been 2 years now and 3 years. But the utilities are fighting it. They don't like change. And so we're actually in front of the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, a lot, arguing our cases on why we think this should go ahead. Now, storage. So this is the last thing we're going to talk about. We said before there's no storage on the grid. That's not actually true. There's no storage on a wire. There is some storage on the grid. Now I think we've got another t-shirt given out, so we're going to have one more if they know what's the main storage on the grid in the USA. And we have someone right here. Capacitors can store electricity, that is true. The grid doesn't use that. Even like electric vehicles are starting to look at that. Capacitors are great because they can be charged and discharged super rapidly. There's almost no degradation. The problem is they don't have the electric density yet. You need just a big thing to do the same as a lithium battery. So that's starting to come, but that's not one of the ways. Hand over here. Running a hydroelectric plant in reverse. We have a winner right here. Yes, hydro storage. There's places all throughout the country that have essentially reservoirs, and they're hydroelectric dams. And so they've got a body that is higher with water and some sort of lake or forebay with water that's lower. When you need electricity, they let the water run down, produce a turbine. That's very common. But they can also turn it in reverse. And like, say, at night, they can push the water back up to store it. And this is a very efficient process. The round trip's about 90% efficient. Can turn around in, say, 10 minutes or less. And it's virtually inexhaustible. There's some problems with this, though. One is you do need this specific geography where you have a high-level reservoir and a low-level. So, for instance, there's a lot of places that have reservoirs, but they just flow into rivers, and the water's gone. There's no pool to pull it back from. The other thing, too, is building a reservoir is really ecologically damaging. You're flooding valleys and doing these things. And so in the United States, there's no plans right now to build more of the pumped hydro storage here, just because of these limitations. Australia, actually, there's a lot more going on now, and they might have more. So pumped hydro is a great way to store it. It only comprises 1% of the grid capacity. Yes?
That way, if you
Yes, so start talking about some of the other things. So have you heard of someone moving rocks up a hill? Yeah.
They're using electric dump trucks, right, or something like that?
Yeah, electric dump trucks. So there's two things I've heard. One is like kind of an electric train where you fill it full of rocks and you run it uphill, and then you let it run downhill. I've also seen things that are basically like ski lifts, where you put rocks kind of on a ski lift and you put it up and then run it down. So interesting ideas, nothing commercial yet. Does anyone know any other ways of storing energy on the grid? We talked about capacitors, which is not quite there yet, but it's coming. But there are some ways we are storing it today. Does anyone know? Are we allowed t-shirts? Oh, no, I think we've got one left. It's probably small, but we do have tote bags and sunglasses. Yes? Batteries, yes. Ding, 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 we have a winner. So batteries is another way that it's really starting to be popular. So this is a Tesla battery pack, 73 megawatts, that was installed down in Aliso Canyon. It's an area in San Diego, and Aliso Canyon was an underground natural gas storage for SCE, Southern California Edison. And this is pretty common where there's caverns underground and utilities use it to store natural gas. So it's there when they need it. The problem with Aliso Canyon was leaking. And the neighbors were complaining about the smell and stuff. It's a huge greenhouse gas. Natural gas is 30 times more powerful than CO2. And so eventually they got shut down, and the CPUC said, no, you can't do this anymore. The problem was that there was 3 gas generators located there that was depending on the Aliso storage for that. So SE was really scrambling to be able to make it through the hot summer months without having blackouts. One of the things they did was energy efficiency, telling people to buy LED bulbs and put more thermal stripping so their air conditioning is more efficient. They worked with us to do a demand response program there, so get people to reduce. And they also worked on Tesla to get a battery pack. And Tesla's done this a couple other places recently in Australia, but the great thing was is that this went in like months. You know, now a power plant takes like years to build and permit. This just went in right away and has very quick response. So lithium batteries is really an up-and-coming storage mechanism. And the grid operators recognize this, the California PUC, that more renewable energy is going to need more storage. So they've mandated that we have, I think it's 2 gigawatts of battery storage on the grid in the next few years. So this is certainly something's coming. The problem is it's just not economical yet. Most battery systems, just the round trip of storing and discharging, the degradation on the battery costs about $100 to $120 a megawatt hour. As we talked about before, we're selling electricity like $40 to $60 a megawatt hour. So it's costing more than we're storing. So we're not quite there yet, but as the technology gets there, we'll do better. Any other storage methods people have heard? There's a few other ones that have been used. We talked about pumped hydro. We talked about batteries. Yes?
I don't know if these are in effect yet, but like I've heard of like spinning flywheels.
Yeah.
When you like need to store something, you know, like you just store it in motion, and then like when you want to pull it out, I guess it just the flywheel spins something else.
Yeah, flywheels. That's a great one. There's a lot of research in flywheels like 10 years ago, and they're thinking like, hey, we can drive a car off it, off of the flywheel. The problem is that there's a lot of heavy mass moving around really fast. You don't kind of want that in a car. But they do have them for like some data centers and stuff. They actually bury them in the ground because if they explode, they won't kill anyone. So flywheels are interesting. There's been research in that, and there's not a lot happening there right now, but flywheels is another source. So another one is thermal storage. You know, instead of photovoltaic, you can have mirrors that put the sunlight on a heat concentrator, and a lot of times those will be married with a molten salt reservoir so that it'll last a few more hours after the sun goes down. So there's other ways of doing that. But storage is a big thing. And you know, if we get storage integrated on the grid, it really is going to help solve most of the renewable energy problems. So